Hi everyone. I'll be talking about preemptive and responsive teaching and travel to roads, which comes from this quote here: "The person attempting to travel two roads at once will get nowhere," which comes from a Chinese book of philosophy called the Sun Tzu. I have to say, to start with, that I disagree. That it is possible in some situations for you to travel two roads, as I wish to demonstrate today. However, because the EL2 road has been a much more preemptive one in the last few decades than a responsive one, I will try to make a case so that you travel a more responsive one. Having said that, I would like to quote John Locke, who said, "If you wish to converse with me, define your terms." In other words, if you're having a conversation with someone and you don't know what the person means by a term, then it makes the conversation really, really hard. So I'd like to start by defining the terms preemptive and responsive. It says preemptive is designed for having the power to deter or prevent an anticipated situation or occurrence, something tending to hinder, which is very enlightening. And so we talk about a country taking preemptive measures to protect themselves from an imminent threat. And responsive is readily reacting or replying to people or events or stimuli, showing emotion, so alert and aware. The very definitions show that there is some positive or more negative connotations to each of them, and that is totally related to the way we teach. When we teach preemptively, we define beforehand what our students are going to learn, and we make decisions for them. If our teaching is responsive, that means that we respond to their needs as they arise, with the consequences there. Right. So preemptive teaching is dead. A lot of people think, oh, we are much more relevant for students. But here's what I have to say. According to Dick Allwright, who retired in the early 2000s, he said, in the 1960s, a language lesson should normally be based on the presentation and practice of previously selected and prepared teaching points. But what happens now? In 2005, he wrote his article saying, a disturbing amount of evidence that this view of classroom language learning and teaching is very much alive, even dominant in deed, if not in word. So I think it's very easy for us to find that that is true. If we take most of the coursebooks, a vast majority of coursebooks, you can see that the whole syllabus has been predefined, pre-selected around specific things to teach at specific times. So the argument is that preemptive teaching is very much alive indeed. Now, where does this preemptive teaching come from? Well, there are many factors, many reasons, but I would like to share three with you. Our views of teaching, learning, and language. If we think that people are a bit like computers or machines, we say we receive input, we receive the teaching, the students process the information, and they produce language, produce output. That's even a way for us to, we even talk about language teaching like this, even today, as if it were machines. Input, output, intake. It also comes from a standardized testing, because if you cannot test it, don't teach it. So it's much easier for administrators, coordinators, managers to show results to parents or to the client if we can test it. And it's much harder to test responsive teaching, which happens on the go. It also comes from the CZS syndrome, which is comfort zone syndrome. Okay, I've invented that term. And you see, it's much easier for you to teach preemptively because everything is predefined there for you. You know more frequently what may come, so you're ready for what happens. However, if you teach preemptively, that means everything is predefined, everything is selected there. But where the magic happens are those teachable moments, those magic moments when student asks the questions, which is interesting. Okay, so as I was saying, I think I was here, we had just talked about personalization, localization, and then we were talking about the reasons, things that hinder responsive teaching. we were talking about the institution and the nature of preset training. If you think about it, most of the famous preset teacher training courses, they revolve around preemptive teaching. You know, the so-called and famous PPP, which is, you know, an example of preemptive teaching. You present the language and so on and so forth until you hope the students will have mastered it. Also, the excessive use of published materials. You know, some people, when A Dogma for EFL, the famous article by Scott Thornbury, was written in 2000, and a lot of people, you know, criticized because, oh, well, are you attacking published materials? But I think the point was excessive use of published materials. They are useful, but if you use them too much, they get in the way of responsive teaching. Also, the teacher's command and understanding of L2, and that is both valid for native and L2 speakers of the language. If your command and understanding of the target language is flawed, then it's very difficult for you to respond on the spot to your students' needs. Also, the teacher's lack of experience or confidence, and also teacher's mindset, beliefs and views of language teaching, and which we have talked about. But one thing which might surprise you is lesson planning. So some people may say, wow, no planning. Well, not really. You should plan, you should post-plan, you should plan during the lesson as well to adapt your teaching, but it's a different type of planning. You plan for opportunities with the learners. You learn to plan, to post-plan during your lesson and to adapt your teaching, which is something a lot of us do. We are going down one lane with our lesson and we see needs adaptation and personalization, and we'll do that. So it's valid to do it. You don't have to march your students along one line and hope that they will succeed. So how can I take the route towards responsive teaching? Make space. If you have too many things in your lesson, then you will probably not have enough space to respond to your learners' needs at the point of need. And you devolve responsibility to learners, for example, having one learner teach the other and small groups working together so that they can work out a language item, for example. More creative activities. Rather than sticking to one set of language focus, try to focus on tasks that bring out their creativity. Encourage learners to co-construct the lesson by asking questions and praise them when they do so. And see spontaneous communication events as they happen and run with the conversation. Sometimes the student asks a question which is of interest to all the other students. If you're not very attentive to that, you will just miss that opportunity. So attention to what students are saying because they are meaningful to the class. Embrace task-based learning and Dogma ELT, of course. You can look that up. And closing considerations, we expect learners to learn less than has been taught, but we have to remember that students can also learn much more than what was explicitly taught. So what learners can and might learn from a lesson is potentially and perhaps normally much richer than just the sum total of teaching points. And finally, these are Dick Allwright's words, but I make them my own. I would not expect or want anyone to abandon teaching points altogether, but I would hope people might consider how helpful it might be to downgrade the teaching point as a central concern and to think instead in terms of learning opportunities, planning for richness of experiences and planning by teachers and learners, for teachers and learners to deepen their understanding of language learning. And remember, maybe this is asking too much, but it could also be fun. All right, and there's a quiz for you. Thank you very much.